Hey, back, it's me, Ian. And in today's video, I'm going to review this. It's Straw Dogs from 1971. Now, this could be considered quite a controversial film, but at the time, maybe nowadays it wouldn't be, or would it? Before I go into the actual film, I just want to say a few more personal things linked with this film. Now, at school, one of the influences of me really getting into film was the art teacher who had this idea that after school we'd have films. He would show films. We'd pay so much. He'd hire them from some place and show them on a projector. And this was really seemed a good idea, and it was a good idea. And he'd also, before he showed the films, would talk a bit about the film, introduce it. In other words, he was trying to get us interested in film, and he did. Now, but what is interesting is, I remember the films that he showed, and they were all ex-certificate films. This was in about 1973. I was 13, yeah, I'd be 13. And he was showing these films. And I can't remember exactly all of them, but I remember 3 of them. And this was the film that perhaps lit the fire and caused the controversy. But the films were this, Straw Dogs. Then there was Magnum Force, which is a great Clint Eastwood film. Still love that. I feel quite good about. And then the other was the Al Pacino Serpico film. Again, actually, it's interesting. Quite similar themes and in there, which actually link to this. Anyhow, I won't go on about that too much in a moment. But anyhow, what is important is that the parents found out they were showing these 18 certificate films. Oh my. It ended up with him having to scrap the whole project. And so we didn't see any more films. But at least if his interest in films helped develop my interest in films, because I saw these films and it made me think about films a lot, and then led me to be watching more different types of films, when I joined sort of film clubs, and seeing art house films as well as looking at the whole history of films. So, I've got a lot to thank that art teacher for. The headmaster wasn't quite so pleased when he had all these complaints from parents saying, how dare you show this to our children. You imagine headlines nowadays, oh dear, yeah, that would really get them going. Anyhow, that's just a personal note. So let's get back to this film. This film was directed by Sam Peckinpah. Now, immediately, that name as a director is important because one of his most famous films was the controversial Western Wild Bunch. And this was a real problem for him because it depicted violence in a very graphic way in a Western. It wasn't your nice John Wayne cozy kind of Western. No, this was showing you what violence really was. And he came across the censors a lot. And he was criticized as well. He was showing violence maybe as it is, not sugar-coated. And there he was. So he had a history already of upsetting a lot of people. This film, in a way, carries on his kind of philosophy about the world and how he sees it. And it's described as a psychological thriller. And that's how it would have been in those days. But I think now we would put it more in the horror genre because it's one of these invasion of the home films that we get so much nowadays in the horror. This is ahead of its time in that sense. Though you could argue that Wes Craven at a similar time was doing it with his debut film. So this idea of the invasion was just starting to creep in, people getting an idea. But this is very clear. But it's much more than that. It goes to some extent into a whole philosophy about violence, about the our ideals versus what happens when we're confronted with certain situations, what happens to us as people. I'll just tell you a little bit more. It was, let's see, if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, it's given 81%. So critics have liked it, though at the time some critics were very much against this film. In 1971, it was considered very shocking to some extent, certainly in the established British sort of scene. So it starred. It's 117 minutes long. I think that's without the cuts, which was a problem. It starred Dustin Hoffman, who was by then quite getting established as a star. The Graduate had really put him on the map, and he was, it's 1971, so he was developing in his career, and apparently he looked at this part and found it very interesting, particularly as it was against some of his ideals. He was a pacifist and whatever he said in his description. Also, it was a great chance for him to come over to England, Mike, and go to Cornwall, because that's where all the location shooting was done. The interiors were done at Twickenham in London, but it was a location shoot. I think that quite attracted him as well. And the script, obviously, and working with Peckinpah, because Peckinpah was, an interesting director to work with. He seemed to fall out with a lot of people around him, but he still got the job done. And it's also, I'm quite interested that he directed things like Cross of Iron, I think, is a really interesting war film. That's from 1977. And I can't believe it, he actually directed Convoy. So I think his career was definitely different then. Convoy is a very different film from these. But anyhow, yeah. And then the other leading actress in this, who had quite a major role in this film in terms of its tone and how it was Susan George. If you look at her filmography, it's quite interesting. She's somebody who obviously was well respected, and she was. Never became big time in her career, never was that, but she's in quite a lot of films if you look through it, but never quite getting the major role. In fact, this is perhaps one of her really biggest roles in terms of film in her whole career, and she plays it brilliantly. I really like her. I've seen her in a lot of other things, and also she went into a lot of TV work and things. So I think she is a good actress, but you almost feel that she should have been a bigger star than she was, But that's all right. She's got a good career, and I think she's recognised now for that. One other little bit of sort of trivia news that now the character Henry Niles, who is quite pivotal. I can't say. Put my teeth in. Pivotal to the plot, the story, was played by David Warner, a young David Warner. There he is. He pops up again. I mean, what a guy. I mean, every time I look at David Warner, I just think how sad he died, passed away this year. And he was in so many things. I don't think we realise. You look, oh, David Warner again. He's popped up again. And there he is in this role. He's quite young in it, but he's there. I think he's fantastic. When I just see that, and I just think what a great career he had. Some great films, and here he is in a classic controversial film. Yeah, there it is. Now you may be saying to yourself, why is it controversial? Well, it's controversial because I think the violence is there, and I don't think people are quite expecting the violence. But if you look at it, it's not that graphic. The real problem is the rape scene, because the rape scene is like 2 rapes, and it's implied, people felt in some of the edit, that she was more consenting in parts. I think the reality is set in that it's clear she's not consenting, but at the time they were very worried about this, and cuts had to be made in it. But it's an important part of the plot. Some people say, oh, blah, blah, blah. But it is a very important part of the plot. And in no way does it glamorize rape at all. But it's so important to the plot, I think. People may disagree on that, but it is important. It's important, and also because the violence that happens, you just understand it, I think, more. I really do. But it all boils down to the philosophy of Peckinpah as a director. How the character Dustin Hoffman, you see, he's come with his wife to Cornwall. He's a writer, and he's working on his book, there he is, and she's there. And they're in this house, which is a nice house in Cornwall. It's sort of in a bit of sort of rural kind of area. And there's a very sort of village community, which is very close, and you stay within that community. There's a mistrust of outsiders. You get all that, and nobody has to step out of those rules or whatever, as there's consequences. And it's a very interesting look at that kind of society, and the way of life in that village. They basically come into conflict with these people, and that is what the story all is about. He ends up protecting Henry Niles, who's, you would consider, is sort of a learning difficulty kind of boy who is distrusted. When I say boy, he's an older adult, young older adult, if you want to call it that. But he's very distrusted. And when this incident occurs with the other girl who he accidentally kills, when he's fooling around, he doesn't know his own strength. And it all comes down to Dustin Hoffman's character defending this character against the mob. And they are basically wanting blood and justice. And they come to get Henry Niles. And that's where you get the whole idea of the siege and them trying to get into the house. And he, who appears to be a quite mild-mannered figure, suddenly changes because he doesn't want people, on principle of doing their own justice, and he's sort of defending this Henry Niles, and also the fact that they have come into the house and are trying to get into the house, and he feels they've no right to do that, and he should defend that right. And so we get a whole thing about that. It's the unwelcome fight against people invading your space, and it changing a person. It's like, it's, the most passive person. Does the animal inside come out where we're defending our territory against outsiders? And this is, in his terms, that is what is happening in his house. It brings out the violent side. And what length and what means will you go to defend that? And your wife, of course, as well. How far would you go as well? And it's just an interesting concept which Peckinpah beautifully does in this violent setting. The camera is never afraid to show the reality and the violence that we see. And this is why he's such a great director. He kind of makes you see the violence for what it is. It isn't just hiding it. It's not glamorizing it. Some people might even say it glamorizes. You can argue that sometimes violence is glamorized, and the way we see it is sort of cartoonish kind of violence. And we can enjoy that, and we do enjoy that in a strange way. But this is not like that. It's a very reality-based violence. It pulls no punches whatsoever. And don't forget, this is 1971. But it's in an era when also there's questions about violence in the cinema. You have Clockwork Orange that's come out. You've had even like Dirty Harry, The French Connection, Death Wish. So you've got, again, ideas about people fighting back against society because society is not supporting and helping you. And that where brings out the vigilante kind of thing, which we got in this area. And people were quite horrified to see some of these ideas. Well, people were horrified to see the violence. Violence in the cinema was certainly being portrayed in a more realistic manner, definitely. And people didn't like that. The censors were very worried about it. People were worried about it would have an effect in society. This all early 70s period, I don't know whether anybody realizes it at the time, but there's such a debate going on between the attitudes of the 1960s. It's like the hippie dream has all ended in a nightmare now. And those ideals are perhaps not what we expected the outcome to be. That's what it's seen in philosophy. Of course, you can argue that for normal people in normal life, some of these things didn't affect them, but they did. They started to see it in their own lives around them. An increase in violence in communities, more people just doing what they wanted, when they wanted, increases in crime. You've got the whole sort of thing going on, and this is all happening at this particular time, and it's how people cope. And you've got around you are political problems, which, like in England, is certainly happening, leading to power struggles between unions and government, working people. People just wanting a better life and finding it very difficult to understand what was going on. And cinema reflected that. And this kind of film was very problematic for many people. But anyhow, looking at it, as I say, I don't want to go on too much. I'm already going on. Yes, I know. It is a great film. It's something that everybody should watch, really. It's the way it's filmed. Now, I was thinking earlier, will it look good on a 4K? It may well improve. I don't know, because there's a lot of the films sort of quality. It would be very interesting to see what it would look like. This edition I've got here is pretty good from what it is. It's the 40th anniversary edition, and it's excellent. You've got a lot of really good extras. I mean, really good extras about the film, and it talks all about these sort of issues that I've been talking about as well in documentaries and what have you. So it's a very interesting look at the film. But let's face it, as I always say with films, I do love this film. It's very enjoyable, and for all those serious things I've been talking about, it's a very enjoyable film. It really is. It has you there. You're with the film. You really into it. It's a great, entertaining film, and as I say, it reminds me very much, and it is very much of what we now say is in the horror genre, even though this would be considered psychological thriller. It's got that horror element within the house invasion, and it's great. So this film is highly recommended if you've never seen it. There was a remake, and from what I've never seen the remake. I almost don't want to see the remake. I don't think the reactions have been too good to the remake. I think that was in 2011. I think there was a remake set in America. It was an American one, but I don't think, from what I've seen, what people say about it, it doesn't come anywhere near this. Well, it wouldn't, would it? I mean, this is a classic. Once you have a classic film, then, there it is. It's a classic film. That's what the word means. Yeah, I just think this is a great film, and I've got that art teacher to thank for introducing me to this film at 13 years old, and then continuing on my journey seeing it at various other times, despite the censors, despite not getting a widespread showing. I mean, there's no way this would have been on TV for a very long time. I think it is rarely on TV now, even, but there we are. So here it is, Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs from 1971. Do yourself a favour. Go and watch this film. You won't be disappointed. Hey, it's at it again! Stop it. Right. Well, that's it. So all I've got to say is, as usual, subscribe if you're interested in what we're doing here. And if you like it, please, give it a like. Go on, just give it a like. As I say, it costs note. So, there we are. So, all I've got to say is, I'll see thee, and I'll see thee again.